She was 58 years old, and she had just run out of road. Not in the way people say it when they mean tired or discouraged, in the way where the actual road ends, and there is nothing beyond it but a rusted gate and a field of winter grass and a farmhouse that has not had a light on in 11 years. Delia Marsh had driven 4 hours on a Tuesday in February with a quarter tank of gas and $43 in her checking account to stand in front of a place she had never once been allowed to visit. She stood there in the cold and looked at it and thought, "This is what I inherited." The farmhouse was gray. Not painted gray, just the color a white house turns when nobody has touched it in a decade and the weather has had its way with it. 2 of the porch railings had gone sideways. The storm door hung open at an angle and banged softly against the frame every time the wind moved across the field. There was a barn beyond it, or what had been a barn. The roof had folded in on one side like a piece of paper someone had pressed down too hard. A rusted weather vane shaped like a rooster sat crooked at the peak of what remained, pointing east when the wind came from the west, which told her everything she needed to know about how long things had been broken here. Before we go any further, if you've ever found yourself at the end of something and didn't know yet that it was actually the beginning, this story is for you. Take 1 second right now and hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and tell us down in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing where Giant Stories is reaching. Now let's get back to Delia. Delia Marsh had spent 31 years being someone's wife, and the last 3 of those years being someone's problem. She had grown up in Knoxville, the youngest of 4, the one who stayed behind when the others scattered. She had married Conrad Marsh at 27, in the backyard of her mother's house on a June evening, when the fireflies were just starting up in the tree line. And she had believed, in the specific way a woman believes a thing, when every cell in her body wants it to be true, that a man who danced that well at his own wedding was a man who would be good at the rest of it too. He was good at some of it. He was good at the early parts, the years when they were building something together, and it felt like building, felt like putting your hands on a thing and watching it rise. They bought a house in Maryville. They had 2 boys, Owen and then Garrett, 2 years apart, and for a while the house was full of the noise that young children make, the specific chaos of it, the shoes everywhere and the cereal and the homework left on the counter and the dogs. They always had dogs. The big ones who took up the whole couch and shed on everything and made the house smell like something living was inside it, which it was. But children grow and leave, as they are supposed to do, and the house gets quiet again, and sometimes a quiet house shows you what was always underneath the noise. What was underneath the noise in Delia and Conrad's house was a man who had spent 30 years slowly becoming a stranger, and a woman who had been too busy keeping everything running to notice, until it was the only thing left to notice. Conrad left on a Wednesday. He did not leave the way the movies show it, with a scene and a confrontation and words that, however awful, at least had the dignity of being said out loud. He left the way a slow leak works. He had been leaving for 2 years before he physically walked out, a little bit at a time, a weekend trip that got longer, an account she stopped being able to access, a phone that was always in his pocket. By the time the actual Wednesday came, there was almost nothing left to leave with. He had already taken it. He left her the house in name, but the house had a second mortgage she had not known about, and 3 months of payments behind on it, because he had been making other kinds of payments elsewhere. The bank sent the letter 4 weeks after he drove away with the truck, and a woman named Patrice, who was 41, and had a laugh that Delia had apparently heard through the wall of a restaurant bathroom the year before, and had not understood the meaning of, until now. She lost the house in May. She moved into her older son Owen's spare bedroom with 2 suitcases and a box of books, and the older of the 2 dogs, whose name was Porter, a 10-year-old bloodhound with ears that dragged the floor, and a talent for putting his head in your lap at exactly the moment you needed it most. She was 58 years old, and she had $43, and a bloodhound and a spare room that smelled of her son's old lacrosse equipment, and she did not know what came next. And then, on a Thursday afternoon in February, there was a phone call from a lawyer in Harlan County, Kentucky. The lawyer's name was Beckett Soames, and he had a voice like gravel settling in a tin pail, slow and deliberate, the voice of a man who had learned to say hard things carefully over a long career of saying them. He told her that her father's sister, her great-aunt, Cecelia Vane, had died the previous month at the age of 91 in the house in Harlan County, where she had lived alone for 30 years. and he told her that according to a will filed with the county clerk in 2014, Cecelia Vane had left everything she owned to her great-niece, Delia Marsh, née Colton. Delia held the phone and tried to think. She had met Cecelia Vane exactly once, when she was 6 years old, at a family gathering in Knoxville she barely remembered, and the memory she had was of a tall woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back tight, who sat apart from the others, and did not seem to need them. Her mother had never spoken well of Cecelia. Her mother had not spoken much of her at all, which was its own kind of message in the particular language her mother used, which was the language of deliberate omissions. The property, Beckett Soames told her, was 12 acres in the eastern Kentucky hills. A farmhouse, a barn, and a structure in the back he called a smokehouse that had not been used as one in 50 years. The county had assessed the value of the whole thing at $4,000, which sounded like money until he explained the back taxes owed on it, which came to $3,800, leaving a net inheritance of approximately $200 if she chose to claim it, after fees. He paused, the way a man pauses when he is giving someone a moment to understand that this is not good news, and then he said one more thing. There is one other item. Your aunt left a note with the will. She asked that before you decide whether to accept or decline the property, you come and look at the front room of the house. She was very specific about that. She said, tell her to look in the front room before she decides anything. Delia sat for a long time in Owen's spare room after she hung up. Porter had his head in her lap. The lacrosse equipment smelled the same as always. $43. A house worth $200 after taxes. A woman she had met once at 6 years old who had sat apart from the family and watched. She thought about her mother, who had died 8 years earlier of a stroke, who had spent the last decade of her life telling Delia, in the particular way her mother had of telling you things without quite saying them, that Cecelia Vane was not a woman worth knowing. Not a bad woman. Her mother never said that. Just not a woman worth the trouble of knowing. Delia had accepted that the way she accepted most things her mother said without fully examining them, which she understood now was the habit of a daughter, raised in a house where certain doors were not meant to be opened. That night she could not sleep. She lay in the dark in Owen's spare room and thought about a woman sitting apart at a family gathering, watching, needing nothing from the rest of them, just watching. And she thought about the specific instruction left in a will. Look in the front room before you decide. Not look at the property. Not read the paperwork. Look in the front room. A woman does not write that instruction and leave it with a lawyer for 10 years, unless the front room holds something she needs someone to find. In the morning, Delia put Porter in the back seat of her Civic with his water bowl and the older of her 2 suitcases and drove 4 hours southeast into the Kentucky hills. The road into Harlan County is not a welcoming road. It does not ease you in. The land rises up fast on both sides and the trees close over, and the sky gets narrow and the towns get smaller and quieter as you go deeper, and by the time you find the county road that leads to the property, the GPS has given up and you are navigating by the names on mailboxes and the memory of a hand-drawn map that Beckett Soames faxed to Owen's house, because he said the address did not always register on phones out here. The farmhouse was at the end of a gravel lane that ran uphill between 2 fields of winter grass. And when Delia saw it in the gray February light, she had to sit for a moment in the car before she could make herself get out. It was not that it was worse than she had imagined. She had imagined it honestly. It was that the place had a particular weight to it, the weight of somewhere that had been lived in hard and then left to and the weather had not been gentle. But standing there in the cold with Porter beside her, she felt something else underneath the weight. The same feeling she sometimes got walking into a patient's room at the hospital where she had worked for 22 years as a registered nurse, before the hospital system cut her department in the last round of restructuring. 11 months before Conrad left, so that she lost her insurance and her income in the same year she lost her marriage. The feeling of a room where someone has only just stepped out, a room still holding the shape of the person who lived in it. She put the key in the lock. It turned. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of old wood, and something she could not immediately name. Something faint and sweet and dry underneath the cold, like dried flowers, like paper that had been kept for a long time in a warm place, and still held a trace of that warmth. The front room was to the left of the entry. A single long room with a plank floor and 2 deep windows facing east that let in the flat gray winter light. A wood stove in the corner, cold ash in the belly of it. A rocking chair angled to face the window, the way a person sits to watch the lane coming up from the road, a quilt folded over the arm of it, faded but whole, bookshelves along the far wall filled to the top, an oval braided rug in the center of the floor, blues and greens and a deep rust color that had faded at the edges, and on the wall above the wood stove, the thing that Delia almost missed because she was looking at everything else first. A large wooden cabinet, old, dark with age, with two doors that latched shut with a small iron hook. Set into the wall like it had been built there, not added later. Something about it stopped her. Not the cabinet itself, the way it sat. Too deliberately centered, too deliberately built in, and the floors around it were cleaner than anywhere else in the room, which meant someone had stood in front of it often enough, long enough, to wear the dust down. She lifted the iron hook and opened the doors. Inside, floor to ceiling, every inch of it, were envelopes. Hundreds of them. Maybe more than hundreds, organized by year, labeled in a small neat hand on tabs of folded paper, year after year going back to 1962. Some of the oldest ones had gone yellow at the edges. Some were tied in bundles with faded ribbon. Some were single envelopes, set apart by themselves in a way that said, "This one is different, this one is separate, this one matters in a way that requires space around it." Delia stood in front of the cabinet for a long time without touching anything. Porter sat beside her and put his nose up toward the letters, as if he could smell what they were, which maybe he could. She took down the bundle from the earliest year, and untied the ribbon, and opened the first envelope, and her hands began to shake. Now, before I tell you what was inside those envelopes, if this story has reached you, take 1 second and hit subscribe so you never miss what comes next on Giant Stories. And tell us in the comments, has there ever been a person in your life you misunderstood for years? Who was it? We'll be right back. The letters were not addressed to Cecelia. They were addressed from her, unsent. Every single one of them. 60 years of letters that Cecelia Vane had written and never mailed. To her sister, Delia's grandmother. To her niece, Delia's mother. To the family she had sat apart from at that gathering in Knoxville in 1972 because she had not known, after so long without them, how to sit among them. And to others. Women whose names Delia did not know at first. A girl named Sandra, written to across 5 years in the 1970s. A woman named Patty, 3 letters in 1981. A family, mother, father, 3 children, named Okafor, written to in careful language over the course of a winter in 1987. It took Delia 2 days to understand what the letters were. She built a fire in the wood stove and made coffee from the can she found in the kitchen, and she sat in the rocking chair with Porter at her feet and she read, and the more she read, the more she understood that she had not inherited a farmhouse. She had inherited a 60-year record of what one woman had done with her life and had never told a single soul. Cecelia Vane had been a nurse, like Delia. She had worked in the county hospital in Harlan for 28 years, and then, when the hospital reorganized and the county changed and the work changed, she had done what she knew how to do without the title. The hill country of eastern Kentucky, in the second half of the 20th century, was a place with not enough doctors and too many people who could not reach the ones there were. Cecelia had driven the county roads with a bag of supplies in the back of her truck, and she had gone to the houses where no one else was going. The letters were her record of them. The people she sat with, the ones who delivered at home because there was no other option. The old man at the end of the hollow who had no family left, and no one else who came. The family from Nigeria who had come for the mine work, and found themselves stranded when the mine laid off and were regarded with hostility by most of the county, and were regarded by Cecelia with a pot of soup and a letter of reference to a hospital in Lexington that ended up changing the arc of their whole family. She had written letters to every one of them. Long letters detailed the way a nurse writes, but also the way a human being writes to another human being when they want to say, "I saw you, I was there, you were not alone." And she had never sent a single one, because by the time she had the time to write them, she had no address to send to. They had moved on, they had gotten out, they had found the next place, the better place, and she did not have a way to reach them, and she was glad of it. She wrote in a note she had tucked into the inside of the cabinet door, "I am glad they went somewhere I cannot find them. That is how I know they made it through." Delia sat in the rocking chair by the window with the unsent letters in her lap and looked out at the winter field and felt something she had no name for. A feeling like the floor under a thing you thought was falling. Her mother had called Cecelia not a woman worth knowing. Her mother had called her solitary, called her proud, called her someone who chose the hills over her own family. She had not chosen the hills over her family. She had chosen the family she found in the hills, the ones no one else was choosing, and she had tended them for 60 years in the particular silence of someone who does not do a thing for the credit of it. She had been, Delia understood, the kind of woman whose work is invisible because it happens in the places the rest of the world has already decided to look away from. On the third day, a man came to the door. He was in his 70s, white-haired, wearing a canvas jacket that had been patched at both elbows and boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hill country mud. His name was Harold Fitch, and he lived 2 hollows over, and he had heard from the county clerk that someone had come to claim the Vane property. He took his hat off at the door and held it with both hands in the way of a man who was raised to do that and never lost the habit. He said, "I don't know if you know this. You might not know this. Your aunt delivered my youngest, right here in this county, in 1974 in our house, because the weather was wrong and my wife couldn't get to the hospital, and I didn't know what to do." He stopped. That baby is 50 years old now. Lives in Cincinnati, has 3 grandkids herself, and every year on that birthday, we said the name Cecelia Vane out loud. We said it like a prayer. Because some names you keep saying because stopping would feel like forgetting, and you will not forget certain things. He told her that Cecelia had been known, in the way things are known in a small county, without being said directly, as the woman who came when you called and sometimes when you hadn't called yet, but she knew to come anyway. He told her that the county had tried to give her a commendation in 1998 and she had declined it. He told her that when she got too old to drive the roads, she had spent the last 7 years of her life writing, in the rocking chair by the window, and nobody had known what she was writing, only that she was writing every day, in the good light of the morning. Delia showed him the cabinet. Harold Fitch stood in front of it and put one hand flat against the side of it, and bowed his head for a moment, and his shoulders moved once, just once, and then he straightened and he said, "Well, there it is." He told her something else. He said that about 10 years ago, a developer out of Lexington had come through the county buying up land, and he had made Cecelia an offer on the 12 acres, a number large enough that Harold, who knew about it because his wife had been the county clerk then, had thought Cecelia might take it. She had said no. She had come into the clerk's office the following week and filed a document that Harold described with the care of someone who has held onto a piece of information for 10 years waiting to give it to the right person. She filed a deed restriction, he said. It's recorded at the county. The 12 acres can only ever be used as a residence. No development, no subdivision, no commercial use. She tied the land to itself the way you tie a knot that isn't meant to come undone. Delia drove into town that afternoon and spoke with Beckett Soames. He was a small man behind a large desk with the patient, measured expression of someone who has watched a great many people absorb surprising information over the years and has learned to give them the space to do it. She asked him about the deed restriction. He confirmed it. She asked him whether there was anything else she should know about the estate. He said, well, as a matter of fact. He opened a folder. In 2014, he said, when your aunt filed the will, she also transferred a savings account into a joint trust. It's a small trust. She lived carefully for 30 years and she put away what she could, a little at a time, sometimes not much at a time. He set a page on the desk and turned it toward Delia. The trust holds $47,212. It's designated for the maintenance of the property and for the continuation of what your aunt called. And here he paused and looked at his notes. Necessary work. He looked up. She wrote a definition of necessary work in the trust document, he said. Shall I read it? Please, Delia said. He read, necessary work means going to the people who cannot reach the people who are supposed to come to them. Going without being asked, and going without needing to be thanked. It means knowing what a body needs when a body is failing, and knowing what a person needs when a person is afraid, and understanding that these are sometimes the same thing and sometimes not. It means keeping records of the ones you helped, not because records matter but because people matter, and a record is how you say, you existed, you were here, I saw you. Delia sat in the chair across from Beckett Soames's desk and did not say anything for a while. The father she had once told her, years before her parents' marriage got quiet, and then got small, and then got nothing. That the truest thing about a person is what they do when no one is watching, and there is nothing in it for them. He had said it once, at dinner, in the offhand way people say the most important things, and she had not thought about it again for 20 years, And now she thought about it, and could not stop thinking about it. Cecelia Vane had done 60 years of the truest thing about herself, in a hollow in eastern Kentucky, where no one was watching and there was nothing in it for her except the doing of it. And she had written letters she never sent to people who would never read them, because writing the letters was how she said, to herself and to no one, you mattered. This mattered. I was not just passing through. And then she had left it all to the great niece she met once, when the great niece was 6 years old, and she had left exactly one instruction. Look in the front room before you decide. She had known. Delia understood that now. She had known that whoever came to settle the estate would be a woman at a hard point. She had known, in the particular way women who pay close attention know things, that the daughter of her niece would be someone who needed to understand something about what a life can hold, and what work can be, and what it means when someone sees you, even from a distance, and decides, in their quiet way, without ever saying it, that you are worth leaving something for. Outside the window of Beckett Soames's office, the main street of Harlan ran between its brick buildings in the gray February light. 2 old men sat on a bench in front of the hardware store. A woman pushed a stroller past the diner. An ordinary Tuesday in a small Kentucky town, all of it held together by the invisible work of the people who never made the news. She told Beckett she would take the property. He nodded as though he had expected this. She drove back up the hollow in the last of the afternoon light and parked in front of the farmhouse, and sat in the car for a moment with Porter beside her. The rooster weather vane was still pointing east in a west wind. The storm door still banged in its crooked frame. But the windows of the front room held the last of the winter sun, and the light coming through them was the color of old honey, and it fell across the plank floors in long, warm rectangles. And the room from out here looked like a room where someone had been warm for a long time. She had $43 in her checking account. She had a 10-year-old bloodhound and a nursing license that was still valid in the state of Kentucky, which she had kept current every 2 years out of habit, out of the stubbornness of a woman who trained for something real, and does not untrain from it no matter what the hospital system decides. She had a property worth $4,000, and a trust worth $47,000, and a deed restriction that meant no Lexington developer was ever going to touch this hollow, and a cabinet full of 60 years of letters from a woman who had done the work. Nobody counted. She got out of the car and went inside. She started the same way she always started things. She cleaned. 20 years of nursing and 31 years of running a house had given her hands that knew how to make order out of disorder, and she let them do what they knew. She swept the plank floor and wiped the windows until the morning light came through unobstructed. She restacked the letters in the cabinet with care, handling each bundle as though it were a patient chart, because it was a record of someone who had been seen and documented and held in someone's regard. She got the wood stove going, and the room, filled with a warmth that was not just heat, was also the particular comfort of a fire in a cold house, which is one of the oldest comforts a human being can offer another one. 2 mornings later, she drove into Harlan with the letters she had read most carefully and went to the county library and asked to speak with whoever knew the most about who had lived in this county for the past 60 years. The librarian, a woman named Gwen who looked to be in her mid-50s and had the quiet authority of someone who has been the keeper of a community's memory for a long time, listened to what Delia had and looked at a few of the letters and sat very still for a moment. Then she said, "I know the Okafors." The Okafor family had not disappeared. The father and mother were long dead, but their 3 children, the children who had been small during that winter in 1987 when Cecelia had come to their house with soup and a letter of reference, were scattered across the country, and the oldest one, a woman now in her late 40s named Cecelia, had been trying for 3 years to find out who had written that letter to the Lexington hospital. The letter that had changed the course of her father's career and made possible every good thing that came after. She had been trying to find the name. She had hit a wall every time. Gwen called Chisholm that afternoon from the library desk, while Delia sat in the chair beside her. Chisholm did not say anything for a long time after Gwen explained, and then she said, quietly, "I have wanted to say thank you for 37 years. They came 2 weeks later, Chisholm and her brother and her sister, and they sat in the front room of the farmhouse, with the fire going in the wood stove, and Porter asleep on the rug, and they read the letters Cecelia had written to their family in 1987, and they held them the way people hold things they did not know they were missing until the thing was in their hands. and they told Delia about their father, about how he had been a mining engineer and what the letter from Cecelia had made possible, about how the family had always said that a stranger with a soup pot and a piece of paper had changed the direction of everything, but they had not known the stranger's name. Only that she was a nurse, only that she came to the house in the winter, only that she had been kind in the specific way that changes things, and then left without asking for anything back. They told it like a family story passed down, like something that becomes part of the foundation of who you are, a debt you cannot repay because you do not know who to pay it to. Others came, the way they had come to Lorna's motel on the loneliest road, drawn by the small signal of a thing long shut now opening again. Harold Fitch came back with his daughter-in-law, who had a photograph of the farmhouse from the County Historical Society's files that showed it in the 1970s, with a light on in every window. A man named Douglas came from over the ridge, who had been the boy born in 1974 on the other side of the county. Not Harold's son, but another one. A different night. A different cold. And he sat in the rocking chair by the window and did not say much, only that he had known there was a name for the woman who had come that night, and he had never found it, and now he had it, and that was enough. And in the evenings, after they left, Delia sat alone in the front room, and looked at the cabinet full of letters, and understood something about the woman she had inherited this place from. Cecelia Vane had not been solitary. She had not chosen the hills over her family. She had been something that her mother's particular fear, and her mother's particular pride had not had a name for, which is a woman who found her people in the people nobody was claiming, and who had tended them in the particular silence of someone who understands that some kinds of love do not need to be witnessed to be real. She had sat apart at that gathering in Knoxville in 1972, not because she was proud, but because she had nothing to say to people who had not been where she had not seen what she had seen, and she had not known how to bridge the distance, and so she had sat and watched and gone home and kept working. Delia thought about her own mother, who had been frightened of things she didn't say out loud, who had translated her fear into the language of omission, who had called Cecelia not worth knowing, because knowing her would have required understanding a life that looked nothing like the life her mother had chosen and had clung to. She thought about Conrad, who had been afraid of the silence that comes when the children are gone, and you finally have to see who is left standing in the house with you. She thought about the hospital system that had cut her department because she was not the kind of worker who made herself visible in the ways that count to the people who count things. They had all been afraid, and they had all done what afraid people do, which is to make the world smaller so the fear has less to work with. Cecelia had been afraid too. Delia knew this now from the letters. Afraid of the cold on certain roads at night, afraid of being too late, afraid, in the last years, that she had not done enough, that there were people she had missed. The fear was in the letters, but she had gone anyway. She had driven the roads anyway. She had sat with the person in the house anyway, not because she was without fear, but because she had decided, a long time ago, that the fear did not get to be the reason. The nursing license Delia held was still valid in the state of Kentucky. The hollow she had inherited needed people to do necessary work. She called Owen. She told him what she had found. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Mom, do you know what you want to do?" And she said yes, in the particular way you say yes when you have known the answer for a while, and were only waiting to say it out loud. She listed her skills with the county health department the following Monday. She drove her Civic up the hollow roads with Porter in the back seat, and a bag of supplies she bought with the first disbursement from the trust, a small one, exactly as much as the place needed and no more, which was how Cecelia had always done it and how Delia intended to do it. She went to the houses where no one was going. She sat with the people who could not reach the people who were supposed to come to them. And in the evening she came home to the farmhouse and she added to Cecilia's cabinet. Not letters. She did not write letters. She kept a notebook instead, a simple composition book she bought at the dollar store in Harlan, and she wrote in it the way a nurse writes, the date, the name, or a description when there was no name, and one line about what the person had needed. She kept it on the shelf beside the wood stove, beside Cecilia's cabinet, which she left open now. Always open, the letters visible to anyone who came into the room, because a record kept in the dark is a record that has not finished its work yet. In the spring, when the ridge greened up and the light changed, and the hollow filled with the sound of the creek running full, She hired a man from Harlan to fix the storm door and the porch railing and the south corner of the barn roof where the damage was worst. She spent exactly what was needed, no more. She had a pot of coffee on the stove by 7 in the morning because the place felt like it needed one. And because a pot of coffee on the counter is a kindness so small, it costs almost nothing and sometimes costs everything that is needed. Harold Fitch's daughter-in-law, the one who had brought the historical photograph, came by one morning in April with her sister-in-law, who was a nurse practitioner, and they sat in the front room and drank coffee and talked about what the county lacked and what a woman with a valid license and a property with a deed restriction and a trust designated for necessary work might do about some of it. There was more necessary work than one woman could do. That had always been true. It had been true when Cecelia was doing it, and it was true now. But necessary work does not wait to multiply until you have enough people to do it. It starts with one woman and a bag of supplies and a hollow full of roads that need driving. And then one morning, a nurse practitioner is sitting in your front room, and the morning after that someone else is, and the cabinet on the wall is open, and the letters are there, and the notebook is filling up line by line with names and dates and one careful sentence about what each person needed. Delia Marsh was 58 years old. She had $43 when she drove into that hollow in February. She had a bloodhound and a license and a great aunt she had met once at the age of 6 who had seen, across a distance of 52 years, someone worth leaving a door open for. That winter, on a night when the temperature dropped to 12 degrees and the creek froze at the edges, a woman called the county health line from a house on the far side of the ridge, a number that now forwarded to Delia's cell phone between 8 in the morning and 8 at night. The woman had a child with a fever and no way to get to the urgent care in town and no money for the gas even if she could. Delia drove out. Porter rode in the back. The road over the ridge was icy, and the headlights picked up the bright shine of it before her, and she drove slowly and with her hands steady on the wheel. When she got there, the house was cold and the child was burning, and the mother was in the particular kind of fear that mothers carry when a child is sick in the dark and there is no one coming. There was someone coming. There was someone who had driven 12 miles over an icy ridge in the dark, because that was what the work required, and because fear had not been allowed to be the reason for 30 years, which was how long Cecelia had done it, and Delia intended to find out how long she could. She stayed until the fever broke and the child was sleeping. She sat in the mother's kitchen and drank the coffee the mother made for her, which was the only thing the mother had to offer, and she drank it the way you drink something a person gives you from what little they have, which is carefully and with gratitude, that has nothing to do with the coffee. When she got home, the hollow was dark and quiet, and the stars over the ridge were so bright, they pressed down like weight. She went inside and took off her coat and opened the composition book on the shelf beside the wood stove. She wrote the date. She wrote, "Child with fever, far side of the ridge. Fever broke at 2 a.m. she wrote, "Sent on well." Then she looked at the cabinet beside her, the one Cecelia had built into the wall and filled for 60 years with letters to people who had moved on to better places. She put her hand flat against the side of it the way Harold Fitch had done, just for a moment. Then she closed the composition book and put it back on the shelf and went to bed. In the morning she would make coffee. The pot would be on by 7. The storm door didn't bang anymore. The south corner of the barn roof was holding. The deed restriction was on file at the county clerk's office, and it was not coming off this land in her lifetime, or anyone else's who honored what this place was for. And up on the ridge, in a house she would drive to again if she needed to, a child was sleeping soundly with a fever that had broken in the night, because someone came when they called. That was the whole of it. That was enough.